So somebody asked just a couple of days ago, is it better to read using a reader's edition or is it better to learn the vocabulary first? In this video, I want to answer that question and give you some things to think about as you consider whether you should get a reader's edition or learn using another approach. Hey there, I'm Darryl Burling from Master New Testament Greek, and I help people with the tools, habits, and systems to master the Greek of the New Testament. And the people I help are everyday people just like you who really just love the Word of God. If you're interested in learning to read the New Testament in the original language, hit the subscribe button and the notify bell, and that way when new videos are released, you'll be the first to find out about it. So the question here is, should I use the Master New Testament Greek approach and learn all the words in the New Testament by heart so that I can read the text, or should I just work with a reader's edition? There's a great question. There's actually some things on both sides, pros and cons of both approaches that you want to bear in mind. Let's start by talking a little bit about the Master New Testament Greek approach. And I'm a little biased here because maybe, I created this, but it comes from a position where my personal goal was to learn to read the original language, right? The New Testament in its original language. I didn't want to look words up. I wanted to be able to read it devotionally. That was my goal. So I started with beginning Greek, just like everybody else, and then I went into exegesis classes and I learned the words down to about 15 occurrences, just like everybody else. After I finished exegesis classes, I carried on and I learned the words down to about 9 occurrences. And I just kind of got to this point where it was frustrating. The rewards were getting smaller and smaller and the effort was getting greater and greater. And so it kind of got to this point of saying, is this really the best way to do this? And so I ended up coming up with the Master New Testament Greek approach. Let me just say up front, regardless of whether you're going to use the Master New Testament Greek approach or learn the vocabulary using another approach, or whether you're going to use a reader's edition, either way, you're going to have a lot of work in really trying to understand the language and the reading as you go through it. But the types of work you're going to encounter is different. And there are pros and cons, like I said, of both. Now, for Master New Testament Greek, the idea is that you're learning to read every single word of the Greek New Testament. That means if you're going to learn every single word, that's 5,600-ish, 5,700-ish, somewhere in there, words that you're going to learn in total. That's a lot of words. And for most people, they look at that number and they go, well, that's impossible. How could I possibly ever learn all those words? And in fact, what's the value of learning all those words, especially if 1,900 of them are hapax legomena? They only occur one time in the Greek New Testament. Wouldn't it be easier just to get a reader's edition and just work from that? Maybe learn all the words that don't occur one time, but occur 2 times or more, and just use a reader's edition for the rest. Well, you could argue that way, and certainly you could do that. But there's some things that we can do to actually help from the Master New Testament Greek side entirely. Let's talk about a couple of those. First of all, you can get a good tool. And I use Flashcards Deluxe, and I encourage my students to use Flashcards Deluxe as well. Now, there are lots of really nice tools for vocabulary acquisition that are available today, and you could use any one of those. But here's why I like Flashcards Deluxe, and it's not a perfect app. It's got a pretty sharp learning curve for a lot of people. But here's what I like about it. It has the space repetition system in Flashcards Deluxe allows you to be very flexible. You can add words, you can remove words, exclude them and that kind of thing as well. Not only that, but it also allows you to flex with some of the proportions. So you can have words that are, you can review more often or less often depending on your memory, which means you can adjust some of those key settings. And when it comes to learning a huge number of words like that, this comes in really helpful, particularly if you pace yourself. You can have the system set up so that you only review words that you know well, maybe once a year, which is fantastic. Why would you want to review a word like erchomai, and you probably wouldn't even include a word like erchomai at all, you'd exclude it after a while. But why would you include a word like erchomai even once every 3 weeks, 4 weeks, months, 2 months, 3 months? Once a year is plenty, especially if you're reading the text regularly. So there are a lot of words that you can easily exclude, and you can do that on a word-by-word basis inside Flashcards Deluxe, which is really, really helpful. So Flashcards Deluxe is a tool that I find really helpful for reading through the Greek of the New Testament and for learning all those vocabulary. And I've had a number of students who have joined Master New Testament Greek, and they've said, well, I used to use Memrise, or I like this app, or I like this app. Why can't I use that? And I always say to them, look, carry on using that if you want to. But then when they get into it and they use Flashcards Deluxe for a little while, they find that there's actually huge benefits in switching to that app. And a lot of them actually make that, most of them, in fact, end up switching over and using that app because it just makes sense. And that's not to say they won't ever use other apps. They at least are able to take advantage of the Flashcards Deluxe and the spaced repetition that it gives you that allows you to scale to a huge number of words without overwhelming you with the number of words you have to review on a day-by-day basis. Most students inside Master New Testament Greek would never review more than 100 words a day, and most would be well below that for the most part. It's not until you get really well down the track that 100 words a day is going to be the kinds of numbers you're going to be reviewing. So that's one thing you can do, is have a decent flashcards app or a good flashcards app like Flashcards Deluxe to really help with that. And I'll leave a link to this and any other tools I mentioned in the description below as well. There's two other things that we can do to really help with this. Another one is that ordering the words book by book rather than by occurrence is going to make a huge difference, right? Why would you want to learn all the words that occur 9 times or less in the New Testament if you're not going to see those words until you get to, say, the book of Acts, right? Because there are 411 words in the book of Acts that only occur in the book of Acts, and many of them are not hapax legomena. In other words, they occur plenty of times. In fact, one of those words occurs more than 20 times. And so we can start to put these words in order of book by book. That way you can read the book once you've learned the vocabulary for that book, and you can read that book fluently without looking words up. So rather than learn by occurrence, learn book by book, and then you can read individual books as you go. And this means that you're actually getting some real bang for your buck for the small amount of vocabulary acquisition you're doing. You're then able to get a really high value return on that very quickly. And on average, using the Master New Testament Greek approach, if you're learning at about 30 words a week, 25 to 30 words a week, every 2 months on average, you're able to read a new book of the New Testament. That means you get a really high rate of return on that vocabulary memorization. And so that makes it well worthwhile to do a little bit of work and then to have another book of the New Testament that you can say, I've already memorized that book. Another thing we can do, a third thing we can do to really help with this, is to actually remove words that you already have learned. So for instance, if you're in 1 John and you see a word in 1 John, you memorize all the words in 1 John, and then you come to 2 John or 2 Thessalonians or whatever book it happens to be next, if there's words in 2 Thessalonians or whatever this next book is that you've already memorized once, don't memorize it again. Just memorize it once. And again, Master New Testament Greek is set up for this exact way, so that you learn the word once and then you just review it over and over with increasing space between reviews, or reducing if you get it wrong, so that you're able to see that word wherever it is. You learn it once and you can recognize that word wherever you go. So you can make it a little bit easier to learn all the words in the Greek New Testament by doing it a little bit smarter. And that's what Master New Testament Greek is really about. It's not a book, it's a system. It's a system that leads you through learning those words in the way that is smartest, going from the easy books to the hard ones. So that's the thing. The nice thing about this whole approach is that you're then able, on a book by book basis, to read through the text of the New Testament without any dependency on a reader's edition, which means you're able to read much faster. Let me come back to that in just a minute when I talk about some of the benefits of the different approaches. If that sounds like a good approach to learning biblical Greek and to learning the words in the New Testament, then go ahead and hit the like button, and that tells me that this is helpful. It also tells YouTube that this is a good video and that other people should watch it. Let's talk about reader's editions. The nice thing about a reader's edition is that you only have to have a very small vocabulary to get started. Most reader's edition have all the words occurring 30 times or less inside the notes at the bottom of the page. And you can see here I have my Greek reader's edition, my Tyndale reader's edition, and you can see down the bottom here the words that occur 30 times or less are at the bottom of the page. This is super helpful, and it means that I can start reading this text pretty quickly after finishing beginning Greek. In fact, even just finishing beginning Greek, I can start to learn the words that occur less frequently, and eventually, very quickly, I'm going to get to these words at the bottom of the page. And that means that I can get reading in the Greek New Testament much faster, which is really attractive. And so there's value in a reader's edition from that sense. It gives you very rapid speed from beginning Greek to actually starting to read the text itself. But note that there is still work required to learn and to maintain those 450 or more words that you're going to have to learn to be able to use a reader's edition. And a lot of people who use a reader's edition aren't focused on vocabulary. In fact, what you find is that the people who use a reader's edition are getting away from vocabulary. They're trying to get out of that habit of using vocabulary at all. And so they become dependent on the tools. But note that as you come to this text and you start reading it and you're having to look down all the time, then you're going to end up taking a lot longer to read this text when you're looking down, depending on the tools, than if you're reading this text and you already know the words. And herein lies the key thing you want to bear in mind. With either approach, either using a reader's edition or using, learning all the words beforehand, either way, it's going to take a little bit of time. The question is, what's the benefit for the time that you're going to spend? On the one hand, you're going to spend more time deciphering the text. On the other hand, you're going to spend your time up front learning the words to reduce the time deciphering the text. And that's the key difference. Either way, you're going to be reading the text. Either way, you're going to be working hard to be able to read the text. The question is it going to be at the time you're reading it, or is it going to be beforehand? And therein lies the distinction in terms of where the benefits are of each different approach. Now, some people are going to argue, well, I'm going to learn the words as I use the reader's edition. And yeah, you're probably going to see some words that occur pretty frequently that you're going to start to recognize as you see them, which is going to reduce the amount of time you have to look down. But that's not going to be the case with all the words, nor is it going to be the case with many of the words. Not only are you going to find the 1,900 hapax legomena are going to make you look down, but in addition to that, many of the words that are more frequent than that are going to make you look down because you just don't know those words. And that means that it's going to slow down your reading. And even no matter how often you read the text, you're still going to find that you're going to be looking those words up. I know that I've spoken to professors, New Testament professors, who will actually go looking up words before they read through a text to make sure they know them all. And the assumption is that they don't know them all, which means they need to go back to the text to a text to find those words before they even read. And that's New Testament professors who are in the language all the time. How much less for us who just want to read devotionally if we're dependent on tools. But the key thing here is that as your reading is slowed down because you're looking down all the time, the value you're getting from that reading is diminished as well. You're no longer following the author's argument, you're actually trying to decode the language, which means that you're not following the argument, you're not getting the most from it. But there's some other things as well you might want to bear in mind. One of the things I often hear from students when they get through and start reading using the Master New Testament Greek approach is they say, I can't believe I've just finished reading all of 1 John and I just used a regular Bible. I could understand it. Now that is the sort of thing that really gets me excited. And not just 1 John, but 2 Thessalonians and 1 Thessalonians and other books. As they go book by book, they're seeing this huge value and they're following the argument very quickly. So this is something that students really love. That means they're getting great reward from this reading very quickly rather than waiting for it, decoding it and reading it over and over to try and get faster at that reading. They're just doing that straight up. It really does speed up the reading and the reward they get from the reading as well. Another thing they often say to me is it's actually much easier to pass words when I know the words beforehand. I look at a word and I'm not sure what the form is, but I know the form that it's from, and so I can work out what it is. I can work out this is an aorist. I can see the tense formative on there, or I can see the augment clearly and distinguish the augment from a verb that starts with a vowel, for instance. So these are the sorts of things that people who know the vocabulary get that a lot of people who don't know the vocabulary will be stumbling around with. So there's value even just in the reading itself of knowing the vocabulary. And because you know the words a little bit better when you start using the Master New Testament Greek approach, the benefit of that is that you're able to follow the author's argument with a lot more comprehension than you would if you were just learning, using a reader's edition and just looking words up down the bottom. Like I mentioned, for most people, using a reader's edition is about decoding the text. With people who are reading using a vocab, knowing the vocab first, they're actually reading the text, not decoding the text. They spend much less time decoding, much more time reading, and they get much more value out of it. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts as well. If you've tried both approaches, I'd love to hear from you down the bottom whether you found there to be a difference or not. Let me know in the comment section below. Certainly for myself, I found it to be a big difference when I knew the words over when I didn't know the words. Reader's editions are great, but they do slow you down more than if you already know the vocabulary and you don't use a reader's edition at all. Now, that's not to say, again, that you're going to be using a plain old text and you're never going to be confused or puzzled by what it means or by what a word looks like or something like that. We're always going to find that. But by and large, you're able to move much faster when you know the words than if you're using a reader's edition. So that's my 5 cents worth. I'd be interested to hear what you think in the comment section below. If you are interested in considering the Master New Testament Greek approach, you can go to masterntgreek.com and you can look at the different approaches that we have there. You can purchase the vocabulary for the entire Greek New Testament laid out for you, ready to go, complete with instructions and video instructions on how to set up Flashcards Deluxe, which is the tool that I was talking about earlier on. All part of that one package. You can find that on the Master New Testament Greek website. So I hope that's been helpful and an encouragement to you to consider reading the New Testament fluently and to make it possible for you to do so. It does take a lifelong commitment to actually really coming to grips with the language rather than just going through a beginning Greek class and saying, now I know Greek. This is much more of a long-term discipline, but it's very, very rewarding. And that's why I have the Master New Testament Greek memberships. If you're interested in that, head to masterntgreek.com today and find out more about it and download your roadmap to mastery as well. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, keep taking small consecutive steps and I'll see you soon. See you later.